Hello. Bit of a funny topic today. RAW versus JPEG. I mentioned this in yesterday's podcast, and I thought that I would touch on it a little bit more. And it's something that I guess I began my photography journey way back. I had this Nikon D50, and I couldn't afford cards to shoot high volumes of files in RAW format. So I shot everything in JPEG. I was a concert photographer. I was blasting away as many frames as I possibly could. And because of that, I kind of had to shoot JPEG. And I realized maybe like looking back 2 years after the switch to RAW, how much more I could have been doing with those files and how much more beautiful they could have looked because of the dynamic lighting and the challenging conditions and the fast movement and just like the way that I could bring out more shadows and save highlights. So I started to notice that a few of kind of the key players and the best photographers in the Toronto area were shooting RAW. So I decided to begin this process as well. But it was definitely a bit of a struggle that I would, for the first little bit, I would only be shooting like the main band or the headlining band in RAW, and everyone else would get shot in JPEG, which is really funny. But when you have small cards and you have no money to buy stuff, it's kind of the compromise that you do. So moving forward into weddings, I actually shot my first two weddings, I believe, maybe three, in JPEG only. Again, because I didn't have the money to invest in cards, which is no longer an excuse. And looking back, I wish that I would have. I did get everything correct in camera, but the thing that I didn't do, I lost a few highlights in the dress that I had to paint back manually, which was it's not an ideal scenario whenever you get home from a wedding. And not only do you have to edit everything and you're editing within the bounds of what a JPEG looks like, that you also have to like go back in, and if you blew out highlights in a dress, that you have to go back and either copy that dress from another photo or actually paint it in, at least so that there is some data there and it's not just like just open white space. Now I'll talk to you a little bit about how I use JPEG in my workflow. So for weddings, for everything, cards are now a lot less expensive. So I'm able to purchase them. I shoot on, as I talked about a couple days ago, I shoot on 128 gigabyte cards at most weddings. That is both for my XQD as well as my SD cards. And I don't ever really find the end of one of those cards at a wedding. My weddings are usually 8 to 10 hour, 12 hour, maybe max days. And with two camera bodies, kind of files spread out between the two of them, I've never even really gotten close to filling an entire card, I don't think. And then whenever I'm shooting video coverage as well, those file or at least the gigabytes come down because photos are a lot heavier on data than videos are, which is a little bit counterintuitive, I think. So when I'm shooting now, everything is in RAW, and I'm processing from RAW files as well for my weddings. And the reason that I do this is because it's just easier to kind of standardize it that way. So what I am using JPEG for, and what I'm very happy with JPEG for, is for my family sessions and my engagement sessions for the most part. Unless I'm finding myself in really dynamic and challenging lighting conditions where I really had to underexpose to save skies. If I'm just out on a regular everyday engagement or family shoot, I am shooting JPEG now. I realized that it was quite a struggle to get home from a shoot, load all the cards in, and then edit the RAW files to look exactly like what the JPEGs are looking like. I shoot full manual everything, including manual white balance, and I also have D-lighting on my Nikon on a high as well. So that kind of adds a tone that I wasn't even really getting whenever I processed my files. So I load those files into Lightroom now. I call just from the JPEGs. Please note that I'm always shooting RAW. I just don't typically touch those files unless I need to. And so I load all the JPEGs into Lightroom. It takes like 2 seconds to import like 60 files or whatever I'm delivering for the engagement or family session. And then I just do a batch preset edit. And it's a modified version, just slightly modified, of my summer 2018 cool preset. And I add that to everything, and that cools everything down a little bit because I tend to shoot in camera a little bit, maybe hotter, warmer than I probably should. So that cools it down a bit, makes it a little bit more, I guess, normal, for lack of a better term, a little more technically correct to actual skin tone. And at that point, I export, and that export takes like maybe like 20 seconds to export a JPEG to a new JPEG. And I understand that that process is a little destructive, that if you are increasing exposure or changing anything significantly, that you are going to lose some data. You're going to see some stuff break up, but the JPEGs that come out of cameras these days are actually really good. I noticed this specifically when I take a photo on my iPhone and run that through just like a ton of destructive processing, and it turns out looking pretty good still. So that's kind of my benchmark on that, that I know my limits of what's possible based on what I do in my phone. And I think that Lightroom obviously processes a little bit better than that in on a computer. So uh, with those as my guidelines, I just know that as long as I didn't put anything outside of the bounds of that in the shoot, that I'm going to process from JPEG, and it's going to take me, I'm going to say like 6-7 minutes to process an entire shoot, rather than like the 15 or 20 that it would take if I loaded in all the raw files to just make the raw files look like the JPEG. So something to think about if you are a little bit worried about shooting raw or shooting only JPEG. Always shoot raw as a backup, but also don't be offended if you are just, if that's what you think. If you like the JPEGs, like deliver the JPEGs. If you're out traveling, I feel like that's another circumstance that it's totally fine to just like post the JPEGs, that you don't need to load things into raw to edit back to what they were at. Obviously, there are some circumstances that you do need to save those skies and save those highlights and bump the shadows, and you have to shoot it a little bit incorrectly in camera to get the end vision that you want. But for most days, controlled lighting, controlled circumstances, I am totally happy to be shooting JPEG, which is funny. It feels like a confession, but it's not. But it's funny to see how my career began shooting JPEG at weddings, and now shooting JPEG when it's the most convenient, because it definitely does speed things up a lot. You get your images back to clients faster, and it just makes your life happier because the editing's done in your camera, like the film days whenever you take a photo and a lab would process everything and send you back, and you would have no real leverage over what happens. The image was just what the image looked like. So it's also I think something that just trains you to get better at shooting in camera as well. So maybe use this as a goal, that if you do shoot a little bit lazy from time to time in camera, just think about that when you get home. Now you're going to have to load the raw files in order to change the white balance. Whereas if you were shooting the exact proper Kelvin white balance, or even in shade or cloud mode, that when you got home, that you wouldn't actually have to do that extra step. All right, that's all for today. Short episode about RAW versus JPEG. I will give a shout out to my new recorder. It is the Zoom H2N handy recorder, and I'm quite happy with it. I've used a lot of Zoom products in the past. They've definitely upped their quality, but I would say that if you're into audio capture in any way, the Zoom H2N for like podcast style stuff is actually really, really fantastic. So look into that. If you want a permanent solution, the microphone that I use at home is the Rode Podcaster, whichever one is the USB. I think it's the Podcaster is the USB connection. I know that you get slightly better quality if you are doing something out of a regular like XLR output, but I think the convenience of it going straight into your camera and not running through an external mixer is pretty good. So maybe that's the RAW versus JPEG comparison of microphones, that going straight into the camera with the USB is the USB that maybe you lose some data that if you were editing that you could get back or transform, but it's easier to just kind of do it correctly, I guess, in camera and get it done, or in computer. Those are my thoughts for today. I'll see you tomorrow. Feel free to DM me with any questions you have. I will start getting to them hopefully over the next couple episodes. And then also starting, I'm going to say maybe 3 or 4 episodes from now, I'm going to get into a bunch of podcasts that I've actually recorded with other people. So I'm going to kind of break those out. So I like the maybe send me a comment on Instagram if you like this shorter format, because I personally listen to a lot of podcasts that are in kind of that 10 to 15 minute window every day. So I'm going to be attempting to break things up with different photographers that make sense. So like one day it'll be social media, one day it'll be gear, with the same photographer kind of broken out over a certain amount of time. Maybe let me know if you would just prefer it just to be like the 1 hour version of that. But I think that the way that I organize it, and the way that when I see podcasts pop up in the morning and it's like, oh, that's a topic that I'm interested in, even though maybe if it was like a full interview with this person that I might not be interested in that. So maybe we'll use this as a way to like wean you into knowing about new photographers. Also, this is DMs getting very long. So if you have any suggestions for other photographers that you would like me to interview on this podcast, let me know. I am happy to include and contact anyone. As far as I know, it's pretty easy for them. All they have to have is an iPhone headset, and they can record audio that is good enough. So thank you so much for listening today. I will see you tomorrow on this podcast. just kind of waiting until it gets 10 minutes. Otherwise, it's only a 9-minute podcast, which is a bit weird. So thanks for bearing with me through those last 5 seconds. See you tomorrow.